Yeah, so we've created a dashboard that is always viewable for you guys behind the scenes. It's just a simple link that you need to add into your browser. And the point of this is to help correlate all of the data that we, as the Calder and Cone River Trust, collect from your samples that you guys provide us. Thought I'd just do a very quick demonstration to help understand how it works. So I've included a brief summary of how it all works and what you can find. You can use the links down here on the left side to go to the page, to go to the relevant pages, or just use the links on the left here. Also the page numbers and also a few instructions about how you can use the dashboard. So first list of all sites is the first sort of slide with all of the information. So this is where you can find the sites that we are aware of, both that are registered with the Army, as well as that have been signed off by the Environment Agency, and also some of those sites that haven't been registered. You can see how many times they've been sampled. This is going back to 2010. So we've got sort of a decade worth of data to sort of go back on. You can use this to see a little bit more information about your site that you've been assigned, including where exactly it is or where the EA have it marked, as well as the threshold or the trigger level, which is also called. Generally, if it's an unregistered site or it's a brand new site, it's going to have a trigger level or a threshold of just 1. But then as we get more and more data, then we can reassign and ask the Environment Agency to review what this should be. And we always want our scores that are submitted to increase over, sort of be higher than the threshold to ensure that everything's healthy and everything's thriving. So this is similar for all of the different slides. So I'll just walk you through here. You can view the site, individual sites. So you can just click only, if I only want to look at the Blackshaw Beck, you can see it filters for that, or you could view a few different ones if you're interested in a couple. Just simply click the one at the top. If you want to see everything again, you can scroll using your scroll on your mouse or drag down the scroll button. You can reorder just by clicking on the titles in the table. And then if you want to look at individual sort of areas, so for example, if you want to look at the Upper Calder, you can see that we've had 20 samples in total from the Upper Calder, and this is them all here. So there's not all of them are active at the moment. Similarly, if you want to look at a particular river or a particular water body, or if you want to look at just those active, and in this instance, currently active means from 2019 to 2021. Just to compensate for COVID and sort of reduction in samples then. So moving on to site locations, this is a similar, the exact same filters at the top, so you can look at just the ones that you want, and it's the same information but plotted on a map, so you can see a little bit more about whereabouts the different sites are and where they fall. In this instance, the size of the bubble indicates how many times it's been sampled in total, again going back to 2010. The color is if it's active or not. So you've got the green are the currently active, and you can see we've got here sample between 2019 and 2021. Similarly to Google Maps, you can just scroll in using the scroll button on your mouse, and you can move it around just with the click of a button. So this slide is potentially one of the most interesting one. It's definitely the one I use the most. For these ones, I'd always recommend just selecting the one site. So if we look at, for example, Frilly Fields, this is one that's got a lot of samples. So now this data is just sampled for that particular site. And you can see that we've got a really nice data record for this particular site going back to 2014. And it's generally been pretty healthy with the scores above the trigger level. So the trigger level are these green points, and the Army score, so the score that you guys get, is in that sort of more dark blue above it. So it's a nice, consistent, well, relatively consistently above the trigger levels. If you look at the graphs on the bottom, this is the species present. So here we can see that the olives are sort of constant throughout. We've got some peaks in June, for example, June and July, similar peak in July that year. And you can sort of use this graph to understand a little bit how the species change. And this is exactly the same graph, but in this case, we've got the percentage of species rather than the absolute number. So again, you can sort of use this to see if there's any decline in a particular species and try to understand what that might mean. So monitoring of sites over time, you can see here exactly how many sites and samples we've had over the year. So for Brearley Fields, this filter has continued. You can see that 2019 was the best, and then it dipped off in 2020 and 2021, mostly due to COVID. But if we want to look at all sites, again, we can see we have had we sort of had a general increase in time, dropped off a little bit, partly due to GDPR issues, and then we've had COVID, of course, and then 2021 we've had a bit more of a healthy season, which is really promising, which we're dead chuffed with. Again, you can use all of these filters. So in this instance, you can look at the date. So if you want to look at just, for example, you can click on that and go back to whatever year you want. If we just look for the last 3 years, back to 2017, you can see everything going back there and hover over the graphs to understand a little bit more about the data. And then we've got a nice pivot chart down here where you've got the river and then what sites fall under that river. And again, you can just scroll to see how many times they've been sampled. So you can see sometimes that we've had 2 samples submitted for a month, and that might be, in fact, I think in this case, that is because one of the sites fell below the trigger level, and protocol is to always complete a second sample. So this sort of helps highlight when that's happened as well. Moving on to the next slide, we've got the different species, and again, you can filter this by site, river, if you want to look at a certain date, and it just shows a little bit how they change over time. So you can see that the olives are pretty prevalent with 20,000 in this time period, whereas the case caddises are much fewer in number, and you want to sort of monitor that over time, so you can use these graphs to do that as well. So the total species count is, as you'd imagine, the total. Whereas the average, if, for example, a site has had 2 submissions, then it's taken the average of those 2, so it's slightly different. Next slide is the species locations, and here the bubbles again represent how many there are of each species, and the color is the different catchment. Again, you can just scroll in and out using the scroll button on your mouse. You can use the filters at the top, you can move the maps around however you like, and you can see exactly what the species are. So for example, the blue-winged olives are much more common down here than, for example, the case caddisflies, the caseless ones. The second slide is exactly the same, just with the other 4 species that we monitor. And then the final slide is all of the data. So again, change the date range to whatever you want. If you want to look at a particular site or a particular catchment, just use these filters. And then here you can see every single sample. So Armitage Bridge has been sampled twice completely in this time range, and it's both times it's been above. You can see what the Army score is. So for this one in June, it was 9, slightly higher, slightly lower in July. And then you've got all the different species, exactly what was found. And then you can use the button here down on the bottom right to scroll through to see all of the others. And that's everything. So like I say, this link is available for anyone that's interested. I think it's been shared on the website, and it's also in several of our newsletters as well, but just give us a shout if there's any more information you want. If you are interested in even more information, you can log in. You have to set up an account with the actual Army website. And if you go to the Data Explorer, you get to this section here. And again, you can select your catchment. So in this case, it'll be Erin Calder. And then, or if you want to do it by a river or a site or an army or anything different, then you can have a look at that. So if we have a look at Erin Calder, search now, it'll spit out the different sites. It's a little bit slower, but it does, and it has everything, so it's not necessarily as helpful if you're only interested in the one area. But you can see that, for example, this site, which I don't believe is one of ours, so there's a few other sites that we're not in charge of that fall under this, but you can see how that's been monitored over time, and again, look at the different species as well, and all of the different, again, the raw data down here. Yeah, so that is it. If you keep submitting your samples via the Google Forms, that's been very beneficial and has really helped us out. And thank you again for all your help.